Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Does Canada need to change the way we elect our governments? Electoral reform. It's been hotly debated in this country for decades. Scholars and advocates have been pushing for a new electoral system, one they say would be more fair and more representative. In 2015, former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau famously promised to make it the last election to use the first-past-the-post system. But here we are in 2025, and that system remains in place. In this federal election, a group of activists are taking their fight for electoral reform directly to the people by signing up dozens of protest candidates in the riding held by Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre. Why are they doing it? And what do they hope to change? I'm David Smith. Today on The Big Story, it's called the Longest Ballot Committee. There are now 91 candidates on the ballot in Pierre Poilievre's riding. 85 of them belong to the Longest Ballot Committee. 91 candidates makes it the longest election ballot in Canadian history. And picture this, the ballot paper itself is going to be more than a meter long because there are so many names on it. One of those names is going to be Blake Hamilton. He's a candidate with the Longest Ballot Committee in the riding of Carleton, and he joins me today here on The Big Story. Hi, Blake. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
So tell me about this. What is the Longest Ballot Committee? Why are you doing this?
Oh, yeah, sure. Longest Ballot Committee started up about, I would say maybe 3-4 years ago. It's a group of people who are very committed to electoral reform, like I am. I've been an advocate for many years. And we wanted to come up with a really creative way to kind of get it more on the radar every election, just to kind of have something that, really brings it to the fore in a kind of a less academic and a more, in some ways could be funny, but also a little more pointed way. So in order to help expose the absurdities of our electoral system and the fact that we can pull a stunt. Well, it's not even a stunt. So we can do something like this in the first place just to show how broken and how absurd our electoral system is. So a bunch of people got together and kind of did some grassroots outreach and got some like-minded people on board. And we've been kind of doing it ever since. So anytime there's a by-election or a new federal election, they will usually put the word out. And people like me who are been involved with the committee are more than happy to get involved again and help spread this message.
Yeah, so is this your first time appearing on a ballot, or were you one of the other names? There were some by-elections the last few years. The one in Toronto got a lot of media coverage. Is this your first time running, or have you done this before?
Nope, this is my third. I ran in the two by-elections last year, 2024, the one in Toronto, St. Paul's. I was one of the candidates on that ballot. And I also ran in La Salle-Marc-Verdun in Quebec, just south of Montreal, later that year. So, this is my third time. But I've been aware of the committee's work, and I'd been approached to run. They had run candidates in a Manitoba election. I can't remember the name of the riding off the top of my head. Just through work commitments and other thing going on, I couldn't put my name forward for that one. But yeah. Here, especially since I live in Ottawa, I'm in a neighboring riding close to Carleton. Just felt like the perfect time to go ahead and do it. Third time's the charm, eh?
And how did you get involved initially? They recruited you. What is the organizational structure of this committee?
It's not far from heavily structured. Basically, the organization, the committee, is just like a core group of about 3 or 4 guys. One based out in Kitchener, another couple based in Winnipeg. They're the ones that kind of caught the idea off the ground, and they're also involved with the Rhinoceros Party, which is still around. And I actually was involved with the Rhinoceros Party back in the day. I ran in 2021 as a Rhinoceros candidate out in Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston. out in Carleton Place area. So they managed to pick up a lot of support and a lot of people that were interested from the Rhinoceros Party. So that was kind of the initial push. It was kind of a Rhinoceros Party initiative, but then it kind of split off and kind of is doing its own. And we're getting people from not just from that party and background and making it a little more comprehensive. So it's just 3 or 4 central organizers and like a great network of people sending out by email, rallying and getting things organized by email exchange through group emails. And yeah, it's pretty loose and I wouldn't say freewheeling, but it's pretty casual, I should say.
Right. So what I'm trying to get at is you're not a party. You're not doing this to try and get elected. It's really about raising awareness. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. We're making a statement. We're not trying to get elected. We're trying to call attention to the absurdities of our system and the need for electoral reform.
Okay. So what are those absurdities? Take me through your case for why we should change the electoral system in this country.
Well, just on the surface of it, the first thing is that, elected politicians shouldn't exactly be in full and exclusive charge of the rules by which elections are held. There's a conflict of interest there. So the fact that even though Elections Canada is a nominally independent organization, they're relying on government support, government funding, and all the rest of it. So there's something of a conflict of interest there that's inherent of that we need to maybe have Elections Canada be a fully independent and self-financed body, but mainly the fact that, again, in our system of government, first past the post, our system of elections, you can have a majority government with unchecked power, unchecked control, with maybe 40% of the votes. So you have a minority of votes resulting in a majority of power and control. And that's pretty absurd. That's not real democracy, because the way our system works, it creates these false majorities, and it creates a lot of this adversarial stuff that's kind of poisoning a lot of our political discourse. So it's a main kind of a real protest against the fact that we have a system that excludes millions of voices. That where a lot of those votes elect no one in the end. Mm-hmm. So the committee started as a more clever and a little more unconventional way to bring about some change, and also call it to the very fact that we can do this, that anyone anywhere in Canada can run anywhere in any riding across Canada, even if they don't have local roots, local representation, shows how flawed our system is. Not only, you can helicopter in someone from the outside that doesn't represent the local community, because local is important, and the fact that, the results, anyone can win a seat as long as they got more votes than anyone else, even if they didn't get 50% or more, they win the seat. So you have candidates that win seats routinely. The majority of them win with less than 50% of the votes in each riding. And I think 2/3 of the seats in last election were elected where less than half of the people voted in the MP that they got. So that's a pretty silly system, and that doesn't really lead to true representation based on how people actually want, what they want, how they vote. So this is how this came about.
Yeah, and just to explain for the listeners who may not be as familiar with the intricacies of it, under first past the post, which is what we have right now, whoever gets the most votes in a riding, they get to be the MP. Those other votes for the other candidates don't count towards anything. Nope. There are other systems where those votes that didn't go to the candidate who ultimately won the riding get counted, and then additional representatives are assigned based on the popular vote. So is there an electoral system that you favor as a committee? Is there one that you're pushing for?
Not collectively as a committee. We just want to advance the cause of electoral reform. What we would like to see, and what a lot of other electoral reform advocates, for instance, Fair Vote Canada as an organization, that we agree with them, is that we would prefer to see what's called a citizens' assembly on electoral reform. So basically take it out of politicians' hands and convene what's essentially a large national jury, have them go over the evidence, talk to experts, so that the people themselves were looking at the evidence carefully and make an informed decision about what other system would work better for us. And so the committee doesn't have one single preferred system. We want a proportional system because it's really either a first past the post system or a proportional one system of proportional representation. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds of proportional representation models. So there's no single one, but we would want something proportional, but we would want a committee, an assembly ideally convened that's nonpartisan, that's independent of government interference, that's, arm's length, and that would help make that decision in a meaningful way without partisan interference or sabotage or anything like that.
Why do you think the former government under Prime Minister Trudeau eventually did away with their exploration of electoral reform? They ran on it. The Prime Minister at the time, Trudeau, promised it would be the last election under first past the post.
Yep.
In 2015, we've had 2 elections since then that ran first past the post. We're about to have another one. Why do you think they ultimately didn't do it?
Well, again, I think based on what I've seen, and I mean, that was a turning point for me too. Came down to Trudeau's personal choice. That Justin Trudeau himself had a very fixed idea of what kind of reform he wanted to do, even though in the process of the parliamentary committee and the steps he initially took as part of that, all the experts and all the consensus, all the people he were talking to were not going with the ranked ballot scheme that he wanted, because the kind of ranked ballot scheme that he wanted really isn't true proportionality, and it would skew the results even more, and it would kind of guarantee liberal success at the ballot box going forward. So I don't think he was even making that promise in good faith, and that seems to be the consensus of a lot of reform advocates, that he was catering to the electoral reform crowd, the people that would want to vote based on that promise, and I don't think he was serious about it. And that, when he went through the motions, but when the motions didn't give him the result he wants, he decided to scrap the process and just go ahead, even though there is an appetite and there is a consensus among most Canadians. Some surveys and studies have shown this is something Canadians want. But when it didn't go in the precise way that he wanted, he let it go, even though lots of liberals I've talked to are in favor of it. The NDP have always been in favor of it. The Green Party have always been in favor of it. The Conservatives have always opposed it because they always want to chase it's between them and the Liberals. But even some principled Conservatives that I've talked to are in favor of it. So there's a lot bigger appetite for this, but one man's ambition, shall we say, or partisan hackery sabotaged it, and it was a false promise from the get-go. And yeah, that did not sit well with me and a lot of other people.
Talk to me about the process. If we were to change the electoral system, what would have to happen? What does that look like?
Well, a lot of people think you have to reopen the Constitution to do it, but actually no, because to change the electoral system, now I should clarify that if we're changing how we vote for the House of Commons, that we can be due through an act of Parliament. Now, if we're going to mess with the Senate, that's a whole different story, because the Senate and the way that's handled and the seat allocation is in the Constitution. But if we're looking at voting reform for the House of Commons, which this is kind of where we want to focus, basically what would happen ideally is we like the Citizens Assembly method. The Assembly makes a recommendation to the government, and the government agrees to explore it and act on it and see it through. So, they could enact a legislation, bill in Parliament to introduce the new system that doesn't even have to be permanent. They could make it a trial run and do it and work it in that, we'll try a new system for the next election, and then we'll do a follow-up to see what people think. They could do a follow-up referendum about it. There's a whole bunch of different ways this can happen. It's not like one stop, put it in and then it can never be changed or tweaked ever again. So the process would really ultimately would have to be through legislation by the government. But obviously we would want the government and a bunch of parties to have consensus on this so that it's a broad-based initiative, that it's not, one party pushing it and the other 2-3 parties in Parliament in the House of Commons say no. This has to be a broad-based thing, and then that goes through as kind of a consensus legislation and go from there. And then we implement the change and change the mechanics and implement the new system.
Would you have to have a referendum necessarily?
No, not necessarily. I mean, this is where the citizens assembly idea comes in, is that we're already engaging people to make an informed decision. Because the trick with a referendum, a lot of people don't know enough about electoral reform. And the last, the provinces have tried this before. Ontario tried it in 2007. BC tried it in 2006. And they did a citizens assembly, but then they tacked on a referendum at the same time. And a lot of people, they didn't put the money and the resources into educating people about what the proposed new system was. And it's easy for people to kind of vote against something they're not familiar with. There's a kind of a risk aversion there. And realistically, voting is a fundamental right. I don't think that should be put to a popular vote, same as you wouldn't put, human rights or, anti-racism, like race protection and discrimination protection against racism and stuff. I think voting is something fundamental, and that shouldn't be put up to a popularity contest and a referendum vote. I think, and not initially. I think we could have that afterwards, where we implement a system, and then we could do like what did you guys think? Should we keep this or go back to the old system? That's a referendum I would like, but not one to make the decision up front, because there's too many people and too many different interests involved to make a responsible, well-informed decision for that. And that's what the evidence shows. So I would say referendum, let's kind of do one after as a kind of a litmus test. Like, was this good? Keep it. If not, let's go back. Otherwise, no, I personally don't think a referendum on this kind of decision in advance is a good idea.
Your efforts at the Longest Ballot Committee have kind of run afoul of Elections Canada. Mm-hmm. The people who administer the election, they don't like all the extra effort it takes to print out these comically long ballots. They say it's a distraction. It makes it harder to count, et cetera, et cetera. The chief electoral officer actually urged a parliamentary committee last year to consider imposing penalties on groups who signs up tons of protest candidates. What did you think of that? Are you worried they might shut you down?
I mean, it's always an option. A concern, I should say. An option, concern, depending on who you ask. Honestly, I mean, I get where they're coming from. There's a lot of extra work involved. And I mean, the returning officers and the electoral poll workers, it creates a lot more work for them. And we're not unmindful of that. But what I would say to that is, why is speed of the utmost importance in any election? Shouldn't accuracy be the thing? So why are we in a speed race to finish the counts as quickly as possible, where in other countries that routinely have more complex, longer ballots like this, because there's about dozens of other countries around the world, especially using proportional systems, that have longer, more complex ballots. And if they have to wait an extra day or two for the results, they seem to get along with that just fine. So I think they're mistaking inconvenience for a burden. And I disagree with that. And I think most Canadians, if you have to wait an extra day to find out the tallies and the results, then they're going to wait, because that's the way the system works. And we'd rather have every vote count equally and properly than fast. So I think I understand the reasoning, but I think they're attacking a symptom, not a cause. That yes, it's not just a protest. It's and you also don't want to deny the democratic right of a Canadian citizen to run in an election. So the fact that they were going to put penalties against people exercising their own democratic rights, that doesn't sit well with me or anyone else, because it's not about convenience. It's about representation and fairness and accuracy. So I think Elections Canada is kind of wrong-headed in their reaction to that. So that's where I stand on that.
Okay. There's a principled argument for proportional representation. Just baseline, it is more representative of the popular vote. You wouldn't have a party getting 40% of the vote ending up with a majority government. But there's also a practical argument as well in terms of the mechanics of government, how the House of Commons functions. A proportional representation will result in fewer, if any, majority governments at all. It would more likely be a minority situation. Countries that have proportional representation more often have coalition governments. Is that something you think would be good for Canadian democracy?
Honestly, yes, because history shows that coalition governments can work. I think something, if we even look at our own history over the last maybe 30 years or so, I think there's only been two majority governments. The rest have been minority governments, and some of them have managed to work fairly well when there's, incentive to actually discuss and collaborate and compromise and have the parties work together. I don't think a coalition government is inherently unstable. And looking at the proportional countries that have that routinely, their election cycles aren't as more frequent than ours. Like, again, they're averaging 3 to 4 years between elections, which is roughly the same as us. And again, countries around the world have been doing this, and coalition governments can work if they're actually people are willing to put partisan advantage aside and talk to other parties, other groups, other people, and form a consensus and reasonable compromise. So and I don't think any one party has it all figured out. So I think parties should routinely cooperate in the forming of government and policy. I think that's how politics should work. It's not my way or the highway. And I just, in the fact that, less than half of Canadians on average ever vote for one party, and yet that one party still winds up with sole control, or they're near enough to it, that shows that there is no mandate for a single party to impose their agenda, their vision, and only what they want, and not be seeking outside input or support for that. So a coalition government and electoral reform institutionalizes that and show that minority governments can work, and this is a way to institutionalize it. So we don't play these majority government power chasing games at the expense of good policy.
Ultimately, in this federal election race, obviously there are some very big, very immediate, and very significant concerns driving vote intention right now. How realistic is it that electoral reform will end up as a priority for whatever party ends up forming government?
Well, yeah. No, that's a fair question. Obviously, it's not as high priority an issue for a lot of Canadians, and I recognize that as, say, cost of living, healthcare, education, national defense and security, law enforcement, the bread and butter issues, as they say. Electoral reform is a bit more abstract, but we're seeing a lot more people kind of realizing that, if a lot of the policy failures or the challenges we're seeing in legislation and government, a lot of the divisions and the paralysis are because of structural problems that electoral reform can solve. So I think a lot of people, when they're seeing, the results that are creating a lot more polarization and division, they're slowly realizing that, this is something that needs to be paid attention to. And, we're seeing a lot more media coverage and popular support for this as government election results are become more skewed and more polarized. So whether it'll be I don't think it'll ever be a top issue, but there's a lot of political will. The Greens have always supported it. So have the NDP. I've had lots of conversations with Liberals. And there was a good chunk of the Liberal cabinet under the Trudeau government when he was still in charge. There was a vote on a Citizens' Assembly and a private member's bill, and 20-something Liberal MPs went rogue and voted in favor of it, even though the rest of the party and the cabinet were told basically not to. So there's a lot of appetite in the Liberal Party as well. Even if that can rustle up some conservative support, because conservatives in the past have advocated for this, but now when they're chasing power under the current leadership, it's, they've been told to not really back it and make all the same bad faith arguments. So not going to be a top tier issue, but I think it's going to get more and more attention. As we see things not improve and we see disproportionate, unfair results that are silencing more Canadians, that are driving dissatisfaction with the system and what it results. So I think it'll get up there slowly but surely.
Okay, well, we'll continue to watch and we'll see what happens with it. Thank you so much for joining the show today to talk us through this and make the case for electoral reform in Canada. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
And again, that is Blake Hamilton. He is running in the riding of Carleton as an independent candidate with the Longest Ballot Committee. And that is the big story for today. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode. Email us hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935 5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. Please remember to rate, review, follow, and share. I'm David Smith. Until next time, thank you for listening.